What is up, Fleek fans, and welcome back to my channel. In honor of Black Panther dropping this week, I wanted to make a brand new Marvel Cinematic Universe ranking on my channel. I've done it once. I did it in kind of a different format. I did a voiceover, but today we'll do it in my face. I'm talking straight to you guys. What are my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe films in order from least favorite to most favorite? Now, this isn't what I think the best made movie is. This isn't what I think the most well-acted movie is. This is a list of my personal favorites. So what's at the bottom of the list are the movies that maybe I don't want to go back and watch as often, and then you mix in how the movie is made, how it's acted, some things that factor in that maybe make the movie not as well received in my opinion. But that's the thing about this list. It is completely and utterly my opinion. Everything that I say here is just stuff that goes around in here. I just wanted to share with you guys what movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe I love, what movies I like, and maybe what movies I don't think measure up, but there really isn't a movie in this list that I really dislike. First off, I want to know, comment your list below. I want to hear what you guys love, what you guys hate, the movies that don't and do measure up for you. That is my favorite part about doing these listings, not my opinion, but hearing how your opinion compares and contrasts with mine. And frankly, I'm so excited to get into this list, so let's do it, starting with number, oh my goodness, 18. There are 18 movies in the MCU. And if you guys didn't figure it out yet, this list includes Black Panther. Oh, we will get to that eventually. Starting off is a movie that I think you guys will find at the bottom of most people's lists, and I hate to fall into the same cliched, oh my gosh, Iron Man 2 is at the bottom, but yeah, Iron Man 2 is at the bottom for no reason other than this is a movie that I think falls apart in many different ways. There's some great things in there, as there is in every MCU movie. I just think this is less of a movie and more of a prepare for the Avengers. Now, I don't mind Whiplash as a villain. There are some good parts to his story, but his story falls flat by the end. I think Sam Rockwell is really the redeeming guy in this movie. I think he's great, and I want to see him come back eventually, even though that's not as likely. But Tony Stark's story here really comes to a halt, in my opinion. There are good things about this movie. It's just, as a whole, it doesn't come together like I wanted it to. The narrative is a little sloppy, and then the third act, I think, is one of the weakest third acts in any Marvel film. This one came really close to being last place on my list, and when I first watched this movie, I was like, okay, there are some really good things in this film, and I actually think it might be a little bit better than the first one. But then you watch movies over and over, and you start to develop a little bit different of an opinion, and in this movie's case, Thor: The Dark World slowly became a movie that fell flat for me in many different ways. It's dark, and I appreciate that, but for me, the tone is very inconsistent with what it is from the beginning to the end of the movie, and there are so many little twists and turns, as well as a really bad villain, in my opinion, that keep it from that fresh level. Now, the dynamic between Thor and Loki is great, but that's really the only thing that the movie has really going for it. Even when it goes back to Earth, which I really enjoyed in the first movie, it doesn't really measure up to where I think it should have been as a sequel for the first Thor, and I believe that's the reason why it's so low on my list. Next up is a movie that I think a lot of people appreciate more than me. It's a movie that's divisive in terms of where fans are and then where casual moviegoers are. Iron Man 3 is a very good Shane Black movie, but in terms of comic book movies, there's a portion of this film, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about, that really agitated me. The Mandarin, Iron Man's main villain, the Joker to Batman. That twist in the movie just really makes the movie go so far down for me. And then in the third act, you have that CGI fest that I just think it falls into the same trap as these other two. But the thing that keeps it fresh for me is that it gives you a fresh take on Tony Stark. I love the aspect of him having PTSD from the event from the Avengers. I think that was fantastic, and the interactions with the young boy were hilarious. It's just the movie for me makes mistakes that it couldn't really come back from in the long run, but I still think it's a solid film. Next up is one that often gets forgotten about, and that is Edward Norton starring as the Incredible Hulk. Now, this is before we got Mark Ruffalo. I actually think Edward Norton did a good job in this movie, and there are some really cool aspects. Yes, there's the CGI fight at the end, but I actually think this fight was one for the ages in terms of Beast versus Beast. Hulk versus the Abomination was really cool, and I think it meant more than some of these other third acts in the MCU. Well, in the MCU. And like I said, a lot of people forget this movie is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe until you see William Hurt pop back up in Civil War, and then you're like, oh wait, I guess Mark Ruffalo looked a lot different. Number 13 is where we start to get controversial. I don't want you guys hating me for putting this movie this low on this list, and not to say that I don't think this is a really good movie, because once you see my score, you'll understand just how much I love these other movies more, but that's Avengers Age of Ultron, a sequel that I do not think measures up to the original. Now, upon first watch, as always, I was fanboying out. I'm like, oh my gosh, this movie is great. It's almost as good as the first Avengers, but the more that I watch it, the more that I see the flaws within the storytelling. Some of the humor doesn't work. Thor's storyline kind of goes off, and I don't like that storyline at all, actually. And Ultron isn't as big of a threat as I wanted him to be. Now, I do think he's a menacing villain and one of the better villains in the MCU. He just kind of falls short to where I wanted him to be, but, you know. I know I said this for the last one, but here's where it gets risky. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, when I first watched this movie, which was just last year, I gave it a higher score than I'm going to give it now, because after watching this movie a little bit more, I don't think it holds up after first watch. It's still a very solid entry into the MCU. It's just so different from the first Guardians, and I think sometimes in ways that maybe don't work very well for the movie, and some of the humor felt a little bit forced upon rewatch. But I still really enjoy Guardians 2, and I think it deserves its place in the unexpectedly good sequels in the MCU list. Up next is Thor! The first Thor, for me, is a very enjoyable film. The aspects on Earth work just as well as they do on Asgard, but I really enjoy how Asgard is portrayed in this movie. I love all of the supporting performances. Now, the thing about this movie that gets me sometimes is the humor. It doesn't work in every way I think it could, and I'm not a big fan of how the Destroyer was portrayed. He was just kind of something that went around causing wreckage, and I know that was the point of his character. I get it, but I love the Thor, Odin, and Loki relationship, and that's one of the reasons why this is so high on my list. Now, these next two, I've been switching back and forth, and I actually gave this one right here a higher score than I give the next movie on my list, but I'm doing it in terms of rewatchability. Which one do I want to watch more? Which one do I have more fun with? Doctor Strange, that is right. I think this is the first great movie on this list. It works in so many ways. It's a great origin story. It uses some very interesting story techniques, and I love this cast. This is a phenomenal cast. Now, does it remind me of the first Iron Man? Yes. Does it use things that we have seen before over and over in superhero movies? Yes, but the ending is as different of an ending that you're going to see in the MCU, and I really respect that. While I think it's maybe not as good of a movie, but it's very close as Doctor Strange, I think Ant-Man is one of the most fun movies in the MCU, and that's why it's so high up on this list. Every single time that I watch it, I get something different out of it. I laugh at different parts. The supporting characters are so funny, and this story is such an interesting one. To do a heist film in the MCU, which is apparently what Infinity War Part 1 or Part 2, I can't remember, is going to be, I think that's so cool. Paul Rudd does a great job, and Evangeline Lilly is going to be phenomenal as the Wasp. Now we move on to my favorite superhero in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we start out with his first movie, that is Captain America, the First Avenger. Yeah, probably my most controversial pick, it being this high up. I know, I understand that, but this movie has slowly made its way up. Not because I continue to watch it and it continues to get better, even though that is true, but because I think the first time I watched this movie, I was so wrapped up in emotion, and I wanted myself to think, okay, there are story flaws, there are things in this movie where it hits a lull, and I'm dumb if I let this emotion wrap me up and make me give this a higher score than it deserves. But no, I think this movie deserves a really high score because it's so hard to put a superhero back in time and give him or her a complete story from beginning to end. They did it with Wonder Woman, and I think they started with Captain America, the First Avenger. I really, really enjoy this movie, I think more than I should. Now we come to the movie that either you were very much anticipating or not. Spider-Man is a hero in the MCU that I didn't know that I wanted him to be in the MCU. I was very content with Andrew Garfield, and while I don't think I liked his movies as much, I was like, alright, just give us a great one with Andrew Garfield and I'll be happy. And then you have Tobey Maguire, who I really enjoyed as Spider-Man as well. Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. But Spider-Man Homecoming did something that was so different, so fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Ferris Bueller. This gave me the Ferris Bueller Bueller feels. You even have a Ferris Bueller reference. And Tony Stark, while I thought he would overshadow the movie, he played a fantastic supporting performance. And we can't not talk about Michael Keaton as the Vulture. Some people really thought he fell flat. I, for one, thought he was a phenomenal villain in the MCU. You see where he's coming from. He's a blue-collar guy. I love that. I love this movie. I think it's great. Next up for me is one of the best directed Marvel movies. Now, it's a direction that I get it. Some fans did not want this film to go in. I, for one, expected something a little bit more epic, but what I got really appeased me in a very unexpected way, and that is Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok was so much fun. Some of the most fun I had in the theater last year. It is definitely a Taika Waititi movie, I understand that, but for what he gave us and what I expected out of him, I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this film, how much I loved the interaction between the characters. The fact that we get a Hulk and Thor movie kind of standalone in the MCU, I think that's fantastic. And it just does a great job at implementing music and fun. And that's what I enjoy about a superhero movie, is a lot of fun. Some people won't like this movie, and I get that, but Thor Ragnarok was a film for me, and I love it. The Tony Stark led, Robert Downey Jr. led Iron Man. This is a great first film. Not just first film in a trilogy, a first film in a franchise. This is the very first movie in MCU. It got it off to a booming start, but I'm not giving it this number on my list because it was the first movie. I'm doing it because this was one of the most raw MCU films. It's about a guy who has to get himself out of a situation using his wits. I think that is phenomenal. It's one of the more realistic movies in the MCU. It's before we had mysticism and magic. I believe it holds up on rewatch. Sure, the third act isn't the strongest, but I do think Jeff Bridges gives us a pretty solid villain, and I really enjoy how he becomes Iron Man. I think that's the best part of this movie. Yes, Black Panther has its faults, mainly the CGI and a third act that was a little weaker than I wanted it to be, but I was so immersed watching this film. I was swept up in the world. They did a wonderful job with every aspect of epicness to this film. The music, the characters, the villains. I want to live in Wakanda. Now, look, I just watched the movie about 4 hours ago. My thoughts may change, but as of right now, I think this movie is going to stand the test of time, and it's a phenomenal origin story. I'm drinking that Kool-Aid, baby. Yes, I love Guardians. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. What a great first film. What a movie that gave you characters you have never seen before, brought them to life in the most creative way possible. James Gunn is a hero for giving us this movie, giving us this music meshed with this movie, and bringing us Chris Pratt as a superhero. I mean, what more could you ask for? I am Groot. I love Rocket, Gamora, and Drax. We're getting into the team movies, babe. We are talking the Avengers. Now, if you would have told me a long time ago, Austin, the Avengers is not going to be number 1, not even number 2 on your list, I would have said, sir, you're crazy. The first time I watched this movie, I'm not kidding, we ran out of the theater. It's my best theater experience of all time. My friend ran on top of his car and jumped up and down. I kid you not. This is a true story. I can't say anything that hasn't already been said, and you guys have already heard how good the Avengers is, so here's a picture of the shawarma seat. Don't you love it? Oh my goodness, I love this movie, and the fact that 1 and 2 continues to switch places on my list just tells you guys the love that I have for these two films. Now, while I think Winter Soldier is better in certain aspects, I do think the other movie left on this list just brings it home and brings so many different aspects together. Maybe a little bit more solid than this movie does, but that takes nothing away from how much I love Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I think it's one of the most entertaining. I think it's one of the best told stories in the MCU, and I just think it brings us so many aspects of Captain America that we have never seen before. It's so much fun. It's so rewatchable. It is in my top 5 superhero movies of all time, and I love Captain America, the Winter Soldier. If you made it to the end, congratulations, you sat through me talking so much. My favorite MCU movie of all time, today, it could change tomorrow with number 2 being number 1, but right now it is Captain America Civil War. If you can't tell, I really like the Captain America trilogy. I love the Captain America trilogy. It brings together so many things, and it does it so well. I think the biggest complaint about this movie is the villain, and while, yeah, he's not the strongest villain I've ever seen, he just does so many things that causes things to happen in this movie that I love. So it's because of him that we got some phenomenal fight scenes and a very just, oh, so good emotional moment at the end from Tony Stark. It's a gorgeously choreographed movie, as Winter Soldier was, and I think the airport scene is still maybe one of my favorite scenes in superhero comic book history, and a rightful place of #1 on my MCU countdown. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Like I said, leave your lists below. Thank you for watching this video, my Black Panther review, all of my reviews, all of my countdowns, and all of my reactions. You guys are the absolute best, and I'll catch you later.